Rome ruled the ancient world. Millions of soldiers, endless gold, absolute power, and then a slave broke it. Spartacus was not born a king. He was captured, sold, and forced to fight for entertainment. Basically, ancient Rome's version of reality TV, except people actually died. But in 73 BC, something went very wrong. Around 70 gladiators escaped with kitchen knives. No arme, no plan, no chance. Rome looked. Then Rome stopped laughing. Those slaves defeated Roman troops. Again and again. In months, Spartacus led an army of over 70,000 rebels. Farmers, shepherds, runaway slaves. The most dangerous thing Rome feared. People with nothing to lose. The Senate panicked. They sent legions, then more legions, then their best general. Spartacus never became emperor. He never sat on a throne, and Rome made sure his body was never found. But 2,000 years later, we still remember his name. Subscribe, because history is full of warriors they tried to erase. So let's talk about how a guy with a kitchen knife became Rome's worst nightmare and why the most powerful empire in history couldn't stop panicking about a gladiator who refused to die for their entertainment. First, let's get one thing straight. Everything you think you know about Spartacus from the movies is probably wrong. He wasn't some muscle-bound hero giving inspiring speeches about freedom while looking perfect. This was 73 BC. There were no gyms, no protein shakes, no Hollywood abs. This was a man who'd been enslaved, beaten, starved, and forced to kill other human beings for rich people's amusement. And he was absolutely done with Rome's nonsense. Spartacus was originally from Thrace, which is basically modern-day Bulgaria. He'd been a soldier. Some sources say he served in the Roman army, which makes what happens next even more ironic. Somehow, he ended up captured and sold into slavery. Maybe he deserted, maybe he was captured in battle, maybe he just pissed off the wrong Roman official. Ancient sources aren't clear, and honestly, Rome wasn't great at keeping accurate records of people they consider property. He ended up at a gladiator school in Capua, run by a guy named Lentulus Batiatus. Now, gladiator schools weren't like martial arts dojos where you learn discipline and honor. They were prison camps where slaves were trained to murder each other creatively for public entertainment. Imagine if someone kidnapped you, locked you in a facility, and forced you to train all day so you could fight to the death in front of cheering crowds who were betting on whether you'd get stabbed in the liver or the throat. Fun times in ancient Rome. The conditions were brutal. Gladiators were fed barely enough to survive, beaten regularly, and kept in cells when they weren't training. They were merchandise, not people, and the survival rate? Let's just say it wasn't great. Most gladiators died within a year of their first fight. This wasn't a career path. It was a death sentence with extra steps. But here's where Spartacus was different. He didn't accept it. He didn't resign himself to dying for Rome's entertainment. Instead, he started talking to other gladiators, planning, organizing. This is 73 BC, and this slave is basically forming a union in a prison camp run by people who crucify you for looking at them wrong. The man had audacity. In 73 BC, Spartacus and about 70 other gladiators decided they'd had enough. They didn't have weapons. Gladiators were kept locked up specifically to prevent exactly this kind of thing. So they broke into the kitchen, grabbed whatever they could find, knives, cleavers, meat skewers, and fought their way out of the school. Picture this, 70 enslaved men, most of them starved and scarred from fighting, armed with kitchen utensils, going up against trained guards. It should have been a massacre. The guards had actual weapons, armor, training. But desperation is a hell of a motivator, and these men knew they were fighting for their lives. Either they escaped, or they'd be caught and crucified, which was Rome's favorite way of making examples of rebellious slaves. They won. They actually won. They killed the guards, escaped the compound, and ran for Mount Vesuvius. Yes, that Mount Vesuvius, the volcano that would later bury Pompeii. In 73 BC, it was dormant and covered in forests, making it a perfect hideout. Rome's reaction was basically, meh, some slaves escaped. Sent a small force to round them up. They dispatched a praetor, a Roman magistrate with military authority. named Gaius Claudius Glaber with about 3,000 militia troops. Not even proper legions, just militia. Rome was that confident this would be quick and easy. Glaber tracked the rebels to Mount Vesuvius and did what seemed like the smart thing. He blockaded the only path down the mountain. The rebels were trapped on a mountain with no way down, no food, no water supply. Glaber basically just had to wait for them to surrender out of starvation. Easy win, right? Wrong. So wrong. Spartacus looked at the situation, trapped on a mountain, enemies blocking the only path down, and said, "Okay, we'll make our own path." The rebels cut down wild vines, wove them into ladders and ropes, and climbed down the opposite side of the mountain, the side that was basically a sheer cliff face that no sane person would try to descend. They lowered themselves down using vine ropes, snuck around Glaber's force, and attacked them from behind. The Roman militia, expecting starving slaves to surrender any day now, instead got ambushed by those same slaves who just climbed down a volcano using improvised ropes. The militia panicked and broke. Spartacus's rebels won decisively, capturing all of Glaber's weapons, armor, and supplies. Rome was no longer laughing. News spread, and here's where things get really interesting. Slaves across the region started hearing about Spartacus. Here was a man who'd escaped, fought Roman soldiers, and won. For people with literally nothing, no rights, no freedom, no hope, Spartacus represented the impossible, successful resistance against Rome. Slaves started escaping and joining the rebellion. Shepherds, farm workers, miners, anyone who was sick of being treated as property. Within months, Spartacus's force grew from 70 gladiators with kitchen knives to over 70,000 armed rebels. That's 1,000 times larger in a matter of months. That's not just a prison break anymore. That's a full-scale revolution. And they kept winning. Rome sent more forces. Praetor Publius Varinius led another army against them. Spartacus defeated him too. Then the rebels defeated both of Rome's consuls, the highest elected officials in the Republic, in separate engagements. These weren't just lucky victories. Spartacus was proving to be a legitimately skilled military commander. Think about what this means. Rome, the empire that conquered the Mediterranean, that had professional legions trained from childhood, that had defeated Carthage and Greece and Gaul. This unstoppable military machine was getting beaten repeatedly by an army of former slaves. Many of Spartacus's soldiers had never held a weapon before joining the rebellion. They were farmers and shepherds, and they were demolishing Roman legions. The Roman Senate was panicking. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was terrifying. Rome's entire economy was built on slave labor. If slaves across Italy started believing they could rebel and win, the whole system would collapse. Plus, this was happening in Italy itself, not some distant province. Spartacus's army was roaming the Italian countryside, and Rome couldn't stop them. Here's a fun fact that really shows how scared Rome was. They passed emergency measures allowing the recruitment of additional troops and even started freeing some slaves to fight against Spartacus. Let that sink in. Rome was so desperate to stop this slave rebellion that they started freeing slaves to create more soldiers. The irony is beautiful. Now, Spartacus had a choice. He could march on Rome itself. His army was large enough. His momentum was unstoppable, and Rome was genuinely vulnerable. Some of his men wanted to do exactly that. Burn the Republic to the ground, free every slave, destroy the system that had enslaved them. But Spartacus didn't want to conquer Rome. He wanted to escape it. His plan was to march north, cross the Alps, and get out of Roman territory entirely. Get to Gaul or Thrace, get beyond Rome's reach, and live free. It was a pragmatic plan. He knew that even if he sacked Rome, he couldn't hold it. Eventually, Rome would overwhelm them with sheer numbers. Better to escape while they could. So the rebel army marched north toward the Alps, and they were winning. They defeated more Roman forces sent to stop them. They were actually going to make it out. But then something went wrong. Some sources say Spartacus's army started to fragment. Many of his followers were from southern Italy and didn't want to leave. Others wanted to keep raiding and looting. The army split, with a large portion under a gladiator named Crixus breaking off to fight independently. Rome immediately pounced on the division. They defeated Crixus's splinter group, killing him and many of his followers. Now Spartacus had a problem. His army was smaller, divided in morale, and Rome was finally getting serious. The Senate appointed Marcus Licinius Crassus to end the rebellion. Now, Crassus is important. He was one of the richest men in Rome, possibly the richest man in history when you adjust for inflation. He made his fortune in real estate, buying up property during Rome's civil wars for cheap and then selling high. He was ruthless, ambitious, and obsessed with military glory to match his wealth. Crassus was given command of 8 legions, roughly 40,000 to 50,000 trained soldiers. This wasn't militia anymore. These were professional Roman legionaries, the best trained infantry in the ancient world. And Crassus was not messing around. He implemented something called decimation on his own troops who'd shown cowardice. Decimation was a punishment where every 10th soldier in a unit would be beaten to death by his fellow soldiers. It was so brutal that it was rarely used. Killing your own troops tend to hurt morale. But Crassus did it anyway to terrify his men into fighting harder. His message was clear: you're more afraid of me than you are of Spartacus, or you should be. Spartacus tried to escape to Sicily. He made a deal with Cilician pirates to transport his army across the strait. But the pirates took his payment and then just didn't show up. They betrayed him, possibly bribed by Rome. So now Spartacus was trapped in southern Italy, with Crassus's legions blocking his path north. Crassus built a massive wall across the entire peninsula, a fortification stretching from coast to coast, about 37 miles long, with trenches and palisades. He was literally walling off southern Italy to trap Spartacus. The construction was insane. We're talking about a wall built across mountains and valleys in a matter of weeks. But Crassus had the manpower and resources of Rome behind him. Spartacus was trapped, but he wasn't done. In the winter of 72 BC, during a snowstorm, the rebels filled in a section of the trench with dirt and debris and crossed Crassus's wall under cover of bad weather. They broke through the blockade and headed north again. Crassus was furious. His impossible wall had been breached, but now he had a new problem. The Senate, frustrated with the rebellion dragging on, had called for reinforcements. Pompey the Great was returning from Spain with his legions, and Marcus Lucullus was coming from Macedonia with his. If those generals arrived and defeated Spartacus, they'd get all the glory, and Crassus would look incompetent. Crassus needed to end this now, before Pompey showed up and stole his victory. So he caught up with Spartacus's army in Lucania, in southern Italy, and forced a final battle. The Battle of the Siler River in 71 BC was the end. Spartacus's army, exhausted from years of fighting and running, faced Crassus's fresh, well-supplied legions. Some sources say Spartacus killed his own horse before the battle, saying he'd have plenty of Roman horses if he won, and no need of a horse if he lost. It was a statement. No retreat, no escape, only victory or death. The rebels fought ferociously, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Roman discipline and superior equipment eventually overwhelmed them. Thousands of rebels died. Spartacus himself fell in battle, though his body was never found. Some say he was fighting so fiercely in the middle of the melee that his corpse was just lost among the thousands of bodies. Others think he might have escaped, though no credible source supports this. About 6,000 rebels were captured alive. Crassus crucified all of them along the Appian Way, the main road from Capua to Rome, about 120 miles of crosses, each one holding a dying slave, as a warning to anyone else who thought about rebelling. The crucifixions were spaced evenly, one every 40 yards or so for the entire length of the road. Travelers walking from Rome to Capua would pass over 6,000 crucified men. It was a message written in corpses. This is what happens when you defy Rome. Pompey arrived just as the rebellion was ending and mopped up some stragglers trying to escape north. Then he had the audacity to claim credit for ending the rebellion, which infuriated Crassus. Both men would later form the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar, but they hated each other partly because of this glory-stealing incident. So Spartacus lost. His rebellion was crushed. Rome won. But here's the thing, Rome never forgot Spartacus. They were so terrified of another slave rebellion that they made crucifixion even more common as a deterrent. They tightened controls on gladiators and slaves. They lived in fear of another Spartacus for generations, and they tried to erase him from history. There are no statues of Spartacus from ancient Rome, no monuments, very few written records. Most of what we know comes from brief mentions and histories written by Romans who were embarrassed by the whole thing. They wanted him forgotten, but they failed. 2,000 years later, we still know his name. We make movies about him. We write books about him. He's a symbol of resistance against oppression, of fighting back against impossible odds, of refusing to accept injustice even when it costs you everything. Meanwhile, Crassus, the richest man in history who defeated Spartacus, is mostly remembered for dying stupidly. He later invaded Parthia seeking military glory, was defeated at the Battle of Carrhae, and according to legend, the Parthians killed him by pouring molten gold down his throat, mocking his greed. Poetic justice. Rome continued for centuries after Spartacus, but the rebellion left a mark. It showed that slaves weren't just property. They were people who could fight, organize, and threaten the entire system. It showed that Rome wasn't invincible, and it showed that sometimes the people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous enemies of all. Spartacus never became emperor. He never conquered Rome. He didn't overthrow the Republic or end slavery. By conventional measures, he failed, but he did something more important. He proved it was possible to resist. He showed that even the most powerless could fight back. He gave hope to the hopeless. And that's why Rome tried so hard to erase him. Because the idea of Spartacus, the idea that you don't have to accept oppression, that you can fight even when fighting seems impossible, that idea is more dangerous to tyrants than any army. So yeah, Rome won the war, but Spartacus won something bigger, immortality. Not through conquering or ruling, but through refusing to bow, through fighting for freedom even when freedom seemed impossible, through being so damn stubborn that an empire had to crucify 6,000 people just to make the point that you shouldn't be like him. 2,000 years later, people are still inspired by a Thracian gladiator who escaped with kitchen knives and made Rome's legions look like amateurs. That's a legacy no emperor could match. Thanks for watching. Remember, history is full of people who were told they didn't matter, that they should accept their place, that resistance was futile. And some of those people said, "Watch me," and made empires panic. Stay rebellious, question authority, and never let anyone convince you that you're powerless. Because somewhere, a guy with a kitchen knife is proving them wrong.